It wasn't a match point. It wasn't a trophy lift. It happened after midnight, when the city stopped paying attention. Alexandra Eala stepped out for a routine shopping run, and within minutes, the night took a turn no one saw coming. This wasn't supposed to be a story, but it became one the moment the car slowed down and the streetlights revealed something impossible to ignore. Eyewitnesses noticed the shift immediately. The pace of the evening changed. The noise faded. On a quiet stretch of road, tucked between closed storefronts and empty sidewalks, several people were sleeping on the concrete. No tents. No thick blankets. Just thin layers against a biting cold that had already pushed most of the city indoors. Fans later described the temperature as unforgiving. The kind that makes breathing sharp. The kind that doesn't care who you are. Alexandra looked again. Then again. According to clips circulating online later, her posture changed in the seat. Shoulders forward. Eyes fixed. This wasn't curiosity. This was recognition. The kind that hits you before you can rationalize it away. Reports suggest the car didn't stop at first. It rolled on. A block passed. Then another. And then something subtle but decisive happened. The car turned back. What matters here isn't the turn itself. It's the pause that came before it. Because that pause is where most people move on. That's where the night resumes. That's where inconvenience wins. But on this night, that pause ended differently. Alexandra Eala isn't new to pressure. She's played in front of crowds that hold their breath between points. She's learned how to reset after mistakes, how to manage nerves when the momentum swings. But this wasn't competitive pressure. This was human pressure. Quiet. Heavy. Unavoidable. And it followed her out of the car. The cold hit first. Witnesses later mentioned how quickly the air drained warmth from exposed skin. Alexandra wore a light jacket, nothing designed for standing still at night. Yet she didn't rush. She scanned the area. Safety first. Distance respected. No cameras raised. No attention sought. This detail matters, because in moments like these, intention shows up in the smallest choices. Fans noticed something else. She didn't approach as a celebrity. There was no announcement, no gesture meant to be seen. She spoke softly. Simple questions. Are you okay? Do you need something warm? Nothing dramatic. Just presence. The people on the sidewalk stirred slowly, cautiously. The night has taught them to be careful. And Alexandra met that caution with patience. Here's where the atmosphere shifted again. Because help at night isn't simple. Stores were closed. Options were limited. But according to eyewitness accounts, Alexandra went back to the car and returned with what she had. Extra hoodies from travel. Gloves meant for training days. A compact blanket folded tight, the kind athletes keep for recovery. None of it was new. All of it was warm. And all of it suddenly mattered. Experts often say character reveals itself when no one is watching. But sometimes, people are watching without meaning to. Someone across the street slowed down. A passing car hesitated. The scene wasn't loud, but it was magnetic. A moment of stillness in a city that rarely stops moving. Fans described the exchange as careful and respectful. Items were offered, not forced. Dignity stayed intact. No one was filmed up close. No one was asked to perform gratitude. It was quiet. Intentional. Human. And that's why the moment lingered. But this wasn't a one-and-done gesture. Reports suggest Alexandra stayed longer than expected. She checked again. Counted heads. Made sure no one was left out. When supplies ran thin, she adjusted. Shared. Rebalanced. The way athletes do when resources are limited and the situation demands focus. And then came the moment that raised eyebrows. Because just when it seemed like the night would settle back into silence, something unexpected happened. A passerby recognized her. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just a look of surprise. A pause. A whisper. The kind that spreads without sound. The energy shifted. Not chaotic. Curious. A few phones came out, but not pointed directly. People sensed this wasn't something to interrupt. Fans later said it felt like watching a private moment through glass. You could see it, but you weren't supposed to touch it. According to those nearby, Alexandra noticed the attention and subtly repositioned herself, turning slightly, blocking faces from view, keeping the focus where it belonged. This detail circulated quietly afterward, shared not as proof, but as perspective, because it revealed intention. Again, now here's where the story takes a turn. Because helping in the moment is one thing. What happens next is another. As Alexandra prepared to leave, she didn't rush off. She asked one more question. Not about herself. Not about recognition. About resources. About nearby shelters. About where to find warmth beyond tonight. Eyewitnesses noticed the tension in that pause. The weight of knowing that one night of warmth doesn't solve a season of cold. That question hung in the air longer than expected. And it changed the tone of everything. Fans later described Alexandra's expression as conflicted. Focused. Like someone processing the limits of a single action. And in that moment, something shifted inside her. You could feel it. Even without words. The car door opened. Closed. The engine started. But the night didn't reset. Not for her. Not for the people watching. Because sometimes the real impact of a moment isn't immediate. Sometimes it unfolds later. Quietly. Strategically. In ways you don't see coming. And this is where the story deepens. Because what Alexandra did next wasn't public. It wasn't announced. It didn't trend right away. But according to fans who began connecting dots days later, that night didn't end on that sidewalk. Something followed her home. A decision. A plan. A shift in priority that would surface when no one expected it. And when it did, it would change how people saw her. Not just as an athlete, but as someone who understood that the hardest matches aren't always played on court. If you're here for stories that reveal what happens beyond the spotlight, subscribe to this channel. Because in the next part, the ripple from that night reaches further than anyone imagined. And the response it triggered caught even her closest supporters off guard. By the next morning, nothing looked different on the surface. Alexandra Eala woke up, trained, followed her schedule. No interviews. No statements. No posts. To the outside world, it was just another day in the life of a rising tennis star. But fans who understand athletes know this feeling well. When something stays with you overnight, it doesn't fade. It sharpens. According to people close to the training environment, Alexandra was quieter that day. Focused, but not distant. Present, but processing. The kind of mindset athletes get when they're replaying something internally while their body goes through routine. And that's where the story starts to take an unexpected turn. Reports suggest that later that week, Alexandra asked questions that had nothing to do with tennis. Not rankings. Not opponents. Not court conditions. She asked about the city. About local programs. About winter shelters and outreach efforts that operate after hours. These weren't public conversations. They happened in passing. Low-key. Almost easy to miss. Fans only noticed in hindsight. Because a few days later, something subtle appeared online. No captions. No explanations. Just a quiet interaction that felt intentional. A like here. A follow there. Accounts connected to community aid. Winter relief initiatives. Local volunteers. At first, no one connected it. But patterns have a way of revealing themselves. Here's where expert observers step in. Sports psychologists often talk about identity expansion. Moments when athletes realize their influence extends beyond performance. Not in a dramatic, savior-like way, but in responsibility. Alexandra, still early in her career, was entering that phase. And she was doing it without noise. Then came the first ripple. Eyewitnesses noticed Alexandra returning to the same area days later. Not at midnight this time. Early evening. Still cold. Still quiet. But different. She wasn't alone. No entourage. Just one additional person. Low profile. Purposeful. Fans described the mood as cautious but calm. No crowd formed. No attention was drawn. And again, no cameras were raised by her. Whatever this was, it wasn't for display. According to those nearby, she wasn't bringing attention to herself. She was bringing supplies. Proper winter jackets. Thermal layers. Heat packs. Items that require planning, not impulse. That detail mattered, because it confirmed something important. This wasn't a one-night reaction. This was follow-through. The atmosphere shifted again. Gratitude mixed with disbelief. Not the loud kind. The quiet kind that shows up in posture. In softened shoulders. In relieved breaths. And Alexandra stayed consistent. Same approach. Same respect. Same boundaries. What surprised fans most wasn't the act itself. It was the restraint. In a world where moments like this often become content, this one stayed almost invisible. Almost. Because nothing stays hidden forever. A passerby shared a brief comment online. No photos. Just words. Describing a young tennis player helping quietly on a cold night. The post didn't go viral immediately. It didn't need to. It traveled slowly. Reposted by people who valued the tone more than the reach. And then sports fans began to connect it. Alexandra Eala. Rising star. Known for composure. Known for maturity beyond her years. Suddenly, those traits had context beyond the baseline. But here's where the tension increases. Because as awareness grows, so does scrutiny. People start watching more closely. Not with bad intent. With curiosity. With expectation. And expectation is a different kind of pressure. Experts will tell you this is a dangerous phase. When good intentions meet public attention, the line between authenticity and performance gets thin. One wrong move. One visible misstep. And the narrative shifts. Alexandra seemed to understand that. Because instead of stepping forward, she stepped back. She didn't increase visibility. She reduced it. Less presence. More delegation. Working through existing channels rather than leading them. According to reports, she asked not to be named in certain internal efforts. Not because she didn't care, but because she wanted continuity without dependency. That detail resonated deeply with those involved. Fans described this as unexpected maturity. Especially from someone still building her own career. Someone who could easily justify focusing only on tennis. But she didn't. She balanced. And then something else happened. Something that pulled this quiet story into a much louder space. During a tournament week, Alexandra was spotted courtside between sessions. Normal, right? But fans noticed her outfit. A small patch. Barely visible. Linked to a winter outreach initiative. No explanation. No announcement. Just there. The internet caught it within hours. Screenshots circulated. Speculation followed. Not accusations. Questions. And questions create momentum. Commentators were careful. They didn't claim anything. They framed it as curiosity. As possibility. As something worth noticing. Because it didn't look accidental. The crowd energy changed. Not during play. Around it. Fans started sharing stories. Similar moments. Similar sightings. Each one small. Each one credible. Each one adding weight. And then came the pressure point. A reporter asked a neutral question in a post-match setting. Not about the outreach. Not directly. Just about balancing life off the court. Alexandra paused. Just for a second. Long enough to register. Her answer was measured. Safe. Thoughtful. She spoke about awareness. About learning. About seeing things differently when you travel. No specifics. No names. But the room felt it. The message landed without being spelled out. Experts later said that pause mattered. Because it showed choice. The choice to keep some things private. The choice to protect the people involved rather than the narrative. But the story didn't stop there. Because while Alexandra stayed quiet, the impact didn't. Organizations began receiving more attention. More volunteers. More donations. Not because she asked, Because people were inspired by the idea of quiet action. Fans described it as a chain reaction. One moment leading to another. One decision creating space for others to step in. And this is where the stakes rise. Because success brings visibility. And visibility brings responsibility. And responsibility brings risk. As Alexandra advanced deeper into competition, the spotlight intensified. Cameras followed. Stories multiplied. And somewhere in that rising noise, the quiet work risked being misunderstood, misframed, or pulled into a narrative she never intended. The question now wasn't whether what she did mattered. It clearly did. The question was whether she could protect the intention behind it as the world started paying attention. Because something was about to happen. Something public. Something unavoidable. A moment where silence would no longer be an option. And how Alexandra handled that moment would define not just this story, but how people viewed her going forward. In the next part, everything collides. The court. The crowd. The conversation. And a single decision that no one expected from a player her age. If you want to see how this unfolds, stay with this channel. Because what comes next didn't just surprise fans. It changed the atmosphere of an entire tournament. The moment arrived without warning. No dramatic announcement. No build-up from the organizers. Just a regular match day that suddenly felt heavier than usual. The stadium filled as expected. Crowd noise rolled in waves. Everything looked normal. But fans who had been following the quiet story beneath the surface sensed it immediately. The atmosphere was different. As Alexandra Eala walked onto the court, eyewitnesses noticed a shift in body language. Calm, but grounded. Focused, but centered. This wasn't nerves. This was clarity. The kind that comes after you've seen something real, something that reorders your priorities. Experts often say athletes play their best tennis when distractions disappear. Ironically, this time, it wasn't distraction that sharpened her focus. It was perspective. The match began fast. Sharp rallies. Clean movement. But what caught attention wasn't just her game. It was the crowd. Applause felt warmer. More patient. Fans weren't just reacting to winners. They were reacting to effort. To resilience. To intent. Something unspoken had connected the stands to the court. Clips circulating online later showed small details. Alexandra handing a towel to a ball kid and making eye contact. A brief nod to someone courtside wearing the same outreach patch. Nothing dramatic. But in aggregate, it painted a picture. This wasn't performance. This was alignment. Midway through the match, pressure spiked. Momentum shifted. A few unforced errors. A tight game that dragged on. This is where stories usually fracture. But Alexandra didn't rush. She slowed the tempo. Took a breath. Reset. Commentators picked up on it. They didn't mention the off-court story directly. But they talked about maturity. About composure beyond years. About how some players seem steadier once they understand what truly matters. Fans described that game as the turning point. Not because of a spectacular shot. But because of restraint. Because she refused to panic. Because she trusted process. And then, after the final point, something subtle happened. No celebration beyond the norm. No theatrics. Just a quiet look upward. A pause. Almost reflective. The post-match scene was where everything converged. A reporter asked a question this time more directly, but still respectful. About community. About responsibility. About using a platform. The room went still. Alexandra paused again. Longer this time. Not out of fear. Out of care. And then she spoke. She didn't claim credit. She didn't tell a story. She spoke about seeing people. About moments that stay with you. About how traveling opens your eyes in ways competition never can. She emphasized that real impact doesn't need attention. That help doesn't have to be loud to be meaningful. Experts later called it one of the most balanced responses they'd seen from a young athlete. Honest without being performative. Thoughtful without being evasive. And something remarkable happened afterward. The conversation didn't turn into controversy. It didn't polarize. It softened. Fans online echoed the sentiment. Not with praise, but with participation. Links were shared. Volunteer pages circulated. Cold weather aid initiatives saw sudden spikes in interest. No one claimed Alexandra caused it, but many acknowledged she inspired it. That's the difference. Over the following weeks, the story matured. It wasn't about a single night anymore. It was about a pattern. Quiet consistency. Respectful distance. Intentional action. Fans stopped asking for proof. They didn't need it. What mattered was the effect. Alexandra returned to training, to tournaments, to the grind. And the story didn't follow her loudly. It followed her lightly. Like context. Like understanding. Experts say this is how legacies begin. Not with headlines. With habits. Because when the noise fades and the season moves on, what remains isn't the clip or the quote. It's the way people felt watching you. The way your presence changed a room. Or a street. Or a cold night that could have been ignored. Alexandra Eala didn't set out to make a statement. She didn't plan a narrative. She noticed something. She acted. She followed through. And she protected the dignity of the people involved. That's why this story matters. Not because she's a tennis player who helped, but because she's a human who paid attention. And in a world that scrolls past most things, that might be the most powerful move of all.